Welcome to the SEND TA training with Zoe Maudsley and Grace Shedwick. We'll aim to give you an overview of special educational needs and disability, the interventions and resources that you could use in the classroom. High quality teaching, differentiated for individual pupils, is the first step in responding to pupils who have or may have a special educational need. Differentiation should continue to promote high aspirations and expectations so that all learners fulfil their potential and achieve their best. For those identified as requiring provision which is different from or additional to their peers, a graduated approach of support must be provided using the process of assess, plan, do, review. These are the four broad areas of need, and it just gives an overview of the range of needs that should be planned for in our schools. The purpose of identification is to work out what action the school needs to take, not to fit a pupil into a category. In practice, individual children or young people often have needs that cut across all of these areas, and the needs might change over time. So, for instance, speech, language and communication needs can also be a feature of a number of the other areas of SEN, and children and young people with autistic spectrum disorder, for example, they might have needs across all of the areas, including particular sensory requirements. So a detailed assessment of need should ensure that the full range of an individual's need is identified, not just simply the primary area. The support then provided to an individual should always be based on a full understanding of their particular strengths and their needs, and to seek to address them all using well-evidenced interventions that are targeted at areas of difficulty where necessary, and sometimes this might include using specialist equipment or software. So we'll now look at the different four areas and the interventions and resources that we might have in school. This slide shows a definition of learning difficulties from the SEND Code of Practice, from specific learning difficulties right through moderate, severe, and then to profound and multiple difficulties.
When you're supporting a child with special educational needs, it's really important that you read through their information. So that's any information that you can get from the class teacher or the SENCO. So you can ask for their pupil passport, their provision map, their educational healthcare plan, and their assess, plan, do, review cycles. And they will outline the short-term goals and targets that the child will be working towards. Supporting a child with special educational needs is everybody's responsibility, so it's really important that you communicate with the class teacher as much as you possibly can. It's everyone's responsibility, not just the person who's working with the child. So make that time in the week to feed back to your class teacher. Always ask them just for a quick 5 minutes, be that at the end of the day, or you could do it weekly, whatever works for you and your class teacher. But really make sure you've got that routine in place so you can feed back if the work is too accessible or if the work isn't accessible at all. And you can come to some arrangement on how to best adapt the work so that the child can make progress. It's also really important that you communicate with the SENCO wherever you feel like it's necessary. If you need to speak to them for some clarity over anything, or if you feel like you need to communicate with their speech and language therapist to feedback, make sure them lines of communication are always open and no question is too little and no question is silly. Make sure you're asking them questions and going to the right people for support. Considering where the child is working is vital to ensure that we create the best learning environment, making sure that there's not too much going on and they're not sat in a busy area of the classroom where they'd easily get distracted and there's lots of noise. Also making sure that we know our child really well. So if they're a child who gets quite anxious, sitting right at the front of the classroom wouldn't be best for them. But if we had a child who struggled to see and needed to be close to here, then sitting right in front of the whiteboard would be perfect for them. It's all about just knowing our children and knowing what works best, and having that open communication, as I've just mentioned, with the class teacher to say, this isn't working, it's too busy over here, they're too distracted, and actually when we go out to work in that part of the school, he really struggles or she really struggles. So just having that open communication and always being aware of how much background noise there is, and can this child concentrate, can they focus, and can they learn best where they are working. It's really important that we break the task down into small steps. It makes it more manageable, it makes the task less terrifying, and it allows the student to make steady progress and helps them succeed at their own rates. It's always important that we consider the child's voice. We must always give them the chance to feedback on their opinion about what works well and what could be improved in their learning. Not all children with special educational needs will be able to articulate this through speech, but you will know this through your own observations of what they enjoy and what they dislike. And that's where the communication comes in. It's really important when you get that valuable chance to gather that feedback to make sure that it's passed on to the class teacher if you find that they really struggle to learn in a noisy environment, or they really struggle learning in sand or water in the early years, they really seem to dislike that. It's really important that you feed that back if the child's unable. And it's also important if the child is able to articulate how they feel. We're constantly listening to their feedback so that we can adapt their learning to best suit them. Always have a routine in place and support that with visuals so the child is constantly aware of their routine and make sure that it's regularly reinforced. With rewards, make sure that the child fully understands what they have to do in order to achieve that reward. If sanctions are put in place, be very mindful about this and make sure that there's always a chance for a child to work back up. So if something is taken away from a child, make sure there is clear steps for how that child earns back an item that may have been taken away, be that minutes from the playtime, be that minutes from a special game that they like to play. Always give them a chance to earn it back if that gets taken away. But I would take things away as a last resort. And controlled choice. Give a child a choice with now and next. Now we do this, then we do that. So they're constantly being reminded, their routine's constantly being reinforced. And that will make transitions smoother and make them calmer throughout the day.
For those who've been identified as having cognition and learning difficulties, you may see a presentation of different struggles in the classroom with these children. They may have difficulty acquiring new concepts in maths and English. Perhaps they have poor working memory skills or slow processing speed. You might find poor handwriting and fine motor skills is a struggle. Perhaps children make valuable contributions in class, but they find it difficult to present their ideas in written form, or written tasks can take much longer to complete than their peers. You already know the importance of moving through a range of concrete, pictorial and abstract methods for all of our learners, but for children with SEN, using practical resources can be vital to increase understanding and embed mathematical concepts. So you should always make sure you have access to a range of practical resources and maths games in the classroom. Important to remember to use practical methods right the way through the school. The same simple objects can be used for sorting and grouping in EUIFS and, for example, fraction work in Key Stage 2. See how this teacher has used objects in a bar model to show 3/5 of 30. By allowing a child to physically complete exercises in a multisensory approach, using movement, visuals, and talking through processes step by step, understanding is much greater. It's often seen as easier to use practical methods with younger children, but don't be afraid to explore the use of maths resources higher up the school. Numicon is a great example of a versatile resource that can be used across the school. From ordering numbers from 1 to 10 and sorting odd and even, to use within the 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. There are, of course, a multitude of amazing resources for maths. Place value and fractions are often identified as weaknesses, so I've just added some examples here of some of the equipment that you might find in your classroom to support those areas. The 2 main aspects of writing which children with SEN may struggle with are learning the mechanics of handwriting and writing composition. And the key to learning for both is practice, practice, practice. Keep to short time sessions so the child you're supporting is able to maintain concentration without becoming bored or uncomfortable. Make sure the child is sitting comfortably when they write, with their feet firmly on the floor. If it's helpful, try using a slanted writing surface. This can really help posture and comfort. For supporting English tasks, it really helps to break down lessons into smaller chunks. Use word banks, glossaries and sentence starters to support ideas for writing. Pre-teaching of key vocabulary can be really useful, and relating learning to everyday experiences as often as possible also helps. Encourage planning opportunities before writing with concept maps and writing frames. Copying from the board can be really difficult for some learners who struggle with reading, writing, or memory problems. Recording steps for them on a whiteboard or having pre-printed sheets to copy from can help. Some pupils will need to record their work or present it in a different way, perhaps using an iPad or a laptop. For learners with visual distress such as dyslexia or Irlen syndrome, coloured overlays might be used where appropriate. Exercise books can also be provided with a variety of different coloured paper to suit the needs of the child. And as a general inclusive rule, never use or present work with black writing on a white background. Interactive whiteboard presentations can be easily adjusted so backgrounds are on a pale yellow or a cream. Or blue whiteboard pens should be used where possible for dry wipe. Try and remember this when printing out work too. If it's possible to do it on a cream or yellow background, that would be helpful. Activities like simple spot the difference games and word searches encourage good reading skills through skimming, scanning, and learning to track back and forth as well. Here are some examples of some successful interventions that you've probably seen in your school. Please get in touch if you want any information about any of these. Or if you've got some recommendations of some successful programs, then also please get in touch so we can share those with others. So on this slide you can see there a definition of social, emotional and mental health difficulties, which is given in the SEND Code of Practice. Pupils that do have SEMH needs can exhibit behaviours which make it difficult for them to function at school, and sometimes they disrupt the education of others, which can be really frustrating. Pupils might be withdrawn, have low self-esteem, exhibit antisocial and uncooperative behaviour, and they might be aggressive in our classrooms too. Many pupils with SEMH difficulties have special needs as great as those with a more obvious disability, and they need really specific help. These children desperately need to develop a sense of worth before they can benefit from their education, and their emotional needs must come first. These pupils want to be liked, accepted, and feel successful. In many cases, pupils experience significant difficulties with acquiring their basic literacy and numeracy skills because they're functioning at that frustration level and they feel that they fail all the time. So raising self-esteem with positive talk, rewards, and just having that positivity is really important all of the time. So here are a few top tips for working with children who have got SEMH needs. Relationships. Many of these children have had difficulties forming relationships at home and school, and there may be underlying attachment needs, or they may have learnt that you get nowhere in life if you show anything remotely soft or warm to an adult. So go gently, take your time and build that relationship of trust, or you're going to get nowhere teaching subordinate conjunctions if you haven't got that element of trust and relationship to begin with. Number 2, you've got to have boundaries. SEMH learners love boundaries, and you might mistake that rebellious nature as a disregard for boundaries, but you would be wrong in thinking that. A lot of that pushing and fighting against is to see if you actually mean business, like a test to see if you mean what you say. So as long as your boundaries are fair and consistent, keep going. 3, change of face. So knowing when to walk away and let a colleague take over is quite a skill. Don't look at it as backing down or that you've lost a battle, because you're not engaged in a battle, and the learner needs you to be the emotionally stable person in that instance. And you simply can't take anything that they do or say personally. Sometimes just having someone come over and take charge and you move away is the best course of action. Try and get a holistic view of the child. Join the dots up about the learner. If they're acting out of character, try and find out why. It could simply be a change of a taxi driver, a new coat, or it could be a larger issue that's causing the problem. But either can cause dramatic reactions, and young people often don't have the skills to cope with or regulate their emotional responses. So if you understand the child really fully, you're better at being placed to help them. Restorative justice. So that visible behaviour that SEMH learners display, we mustn't cover it over with a poor thing approach. This means we don't do the young person any favours to say, oh, they're having a really hard time, the poor thing, whilst letting them repeatedly throw a pen off their friend's head. We have to prepare SEMH learners to live as adults in the real world, and we know how hard that can be, even when you are feeling emotionally stable. So restorative justice techniques, and we've practiced these within the MAT, they do really support the learner to identify their own faults and to learn how to put things right when things do go wrong. Recycle your strategies. So what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, and you need a big, deep bag of ideas. And if the current successful strategy begins to fail, don't bin it, save it to be used for later. You often end up returning to past strategies and find that they might work again. So the key is to not think that they've failed, just that they might be failing at that moment. Be resilient yourself. When an SEMH learner calls you the worst things possible, don't take it personally. For some learners, it's just an automatic defence, like a self-protection strategy. For others, it's like a test to see how you cope, for the expectation will be that you won't carry on being there for them. For others, it might just simply be the normal way that they communicate within their home environment. So try and empathise. Don't take things personally. You might feel free to need a rant at colleagues or a cry in the loo, but don't do it in front of the child. A fresh start. Try and make every day a fresh start. Ensure that where possible, any consequences happen on the day that they were given, so that the learner knows tomorrow is a new day, a fresh slate, chance to start again. Keep your promises. If you say that a child can join a certain lunch club, then they must join. If you tell them that they can play football at break time, then you must let them. This builds trust and encourages relationships. And for those SEMH children that constantly feel let down by adults, you need to be the one that shows them that the opposite can also be true. Finally, be real. SEMH learners are quite savvy at knowing when you're being authentic or if you're putting on an act. They'll have much more respect for you if they know that it's you that they're dealing with. And this actually goes much deeper. It can also be a way of saying, hey, I'm not perfect either. Let them see you make mistakes. Oops, I spelt that wrong. Let them know that you find things hard. Oh, I've always struggled with learning my times tables too. And that way they can begin to realise that they're actually allowed to be imperfect themselves. We have access to Boxall profiling in school. It's a diagnostic assessment tool designed to assess the specific areas of needs for learners who are exhibiting social, emotional and behavioural difficulties. The Boxall profile identifies positive and negative behaviours through 2 questionnaires, one to assess positive behaviours and one to assess the negative behaviours. And then it suggests an order in which to address the identified developmental needs and the negative behaviours. We also have a range of books in school which can be used with children to support a variety of SEMH needs, such as anxiety, self-esteem, anger, bereavement, attachment, identifying emotions and behaviour regulation. And these books provide a range of different activities and top tips to promote discussion with the child. We can use a range of strategies in the classroom to make a child feel secure about their environment. Visual timetables and now and next cards work really well to reduce anxiety. Rewards work well to motivate children, and this is where an I'm working towards chart is really successful in showing a visual representation of the child's achievements before a reward is given. For children who might struggle with control, use a choice board. The key here is using outcomes which fit your agenda whilst making it seem to the child that they have the choice. So you might say, you can read your flashcards or you can practice your times tables. Both outcomes are desirable for you, and it really doesn't matter which order the tasks are completed in. Ultimately, we want to avoid situations of crisis for the children, so it's really important that you get to know your children really well so that you can spot any early signs of agitation, and don't ignore these thinking that the child might just calm down. So it might be something like clenched fists, fidgeting, shaking, swinging on their chair, perhaps they're eyeballing another child, clenching their jaw tightly, or maybe their speech changes and the pitch might become more rapid or high. So just take notice of those subtle changes. And then there are a number of verbal and non-verbal techniques that you can use. So appear calm and self-assured, keep that neutral expression, give the child some space, and control your own breathing. It's important that you stay calm and then they can tune into your breathing too. Verbal techniques: lower your voice, keep calm, clear, and even tone, and use distraction and diversion where you can. And we've got whine on there. That's wondering, imagining, noticing, and using empathy. So you might say, I wonder if you're feeling confused about the maths task this morning. Or, I imagine it's so frustrating when everyone else seems to know what to do. I noticed that you're rocking on your chair a lot this morning. Do you want to come and have a little break? How awful for you. This maths is so difficult today. And avoid using any humour or sarcasm. Sometimes, during your work with children with emotional and behavioural difficulties, safeguarding concerns might be raised. Please remember that if you do have particular concerns about the emotional well-being of a child, seek advice from the safeguarding lead or SENCO in your school. The Trust Counsellor and Wellbeing Lead, Sarah Schofield, is also available for advice, and we do have a number of trauma-informed practitioners within the MAT.
The SEN Code of Practice states that children and young people with speech, language and communication needs have difficulty in communicating with others. This may be because they have difficulty saying what they want to, understanding what is being said to them, or they do not understand or use social rules of communication. The profile for every child with speech, language and communication needs is different, and their needs may change over time. They may have difficulty with one, some, or all of the different aspects of speech, language or social communication at different times of their lives. Children and young people with ASD, including Asperger's syndrome and autism, are likely to have particular difficulties with social interaction. They might also experience difficulties with language, communication, and imagination, which can impact on how they relate to others. It impacts on how they make friendships and how they build positive relationships with adults. Children will likely have difficulty following instructions and may be slower to respond to instructions. So it's useful to use visual support, signing systems such as Makaton if needed, or visual cues or now and next boards. Make sure you have their attention before giving any spoken information. Give enough time for a child to respond before repeating the instruction. Speak slowly and clearly. Break down instructions, and play listening and attention games regularly with this child. So things such as Simon Says, play tea parties, anything where the child has to really work on them listening and attention skills. If a child appears not to listen and does not respond, it's best to be aware of any sensory dislikes and likes for this child. Make sure you give the child specific feedback and instructions, and make sure you have their attention before giving any spoken instruction. Break down the spoken instructions and check that their hearing has been tested. And listening skills should be explicitly taught, so the child should have listening rules on visual cues so you can always refer back to them to prompt them to listen. Speech characterised by repetitions of sounds or words, elongations of sounds, or long pauses between words. Try and maintain eye contact with the child when they are speaking. Always discuss your concerns with a speech and language therapist. Don't ask the child to repeat what has been said, and give them time to say what they want to say. Prepare the child for any events or school trips, and use a slow rate of speech. Do not interrupt the child until they have clearly finished their sentence, and do not finish their sentence for them. And never pressure the child to talk. Children may have difficulty learning words, putting words in a sentence, and may point to objects with little or no spoken language. It's important to play and create play scenarios to support new word learning, and follow the child's lead during play. Repeat back to them any utterance they make, and add one word onto this. So if the child says car, then the adult needs to model yes, red car. So you're always modelling that positive, perfect language, and give specific feedback. So always praise good talking, and teach any new vocabulary in multiple ways and settings. Use visual supports where necessary, and allow the child to hear the word, any new words, multiple times in context. And offer choices. Do you want milk or juice? So they're always getting introduced to new vocabulary. And create opportunities for communication for the child to ask for items in any way they can. So don't provide all the items that are needed. Play listening and attention games wherever possible. Children with communication and interaction needs often struggle to make friends, so it's really important that we take the time to give them explicit teaching of social skills, be that through visuals, be that taking a child out of their environment and you going through the scenarios with the child. So if a child's knocked down another child's bricks, or if they're struggling to have a conversation with a child, if you take that child away and model that conversation positively and give that child the skills to cope in that situation. Support friendship skills, for example, through circle of friends, or you can do some circle times, some small circle times, and a buddy system, so buddying up the child with a really good positive role model. So if a child's speech is unclear, we must always model the way the words are said in speech, and we must always play regular sound games to give as much exposure to the correct sounds. Don't ask the child to repeat, and use visual support to aid understanding if necessary. Always check that their hearing has been tested, and use a slow rate of speech. So if a child may talk in some situations and not in others, it's important that we never pressure the child to talk. Try to reduce anxiety as much as possible. So are they in a place where they feel comfortable and do they feel safe? Think about where the child is seated in the classroom. Being at the front may increase their anxieties. Find ways to communicate that can avoid speaking when they feel uncomfortable. For example, using toilet passes and a nodding pass, or have your own form of communication that the child can engage with that's not just based solely on speaking. Here are a range of practical resources and interventions that can be used to effectively overcome the barriers to learning experienced by children who have communication and interaction needs. In school, we use speech and language interventions such as welcome, time to talk, Lego therapy, and drawing and talking. We use colourful semantics, a range of multi-sensory approaches used to support spoken language such as symbols, pictures, concrete apparatus, artefacts, role play, scripts and social stories. It's important that key words and key vocabulary is emphasised when speaking should also be displayed visually with picture cues, that we have word walls or word maps, or similar to develop the understanding of the new vocabulary. Delivery of information should be slowed down with time given to allow processing. Any checklists, success criteria, or task lists should be simple and also have visual cues. Rules of good listening need to be displayed, taught, modelled, and regularly reinforced. And we should always pre-teach where possible. Children should be given a demonstration of what is expected, and intentions should always be clear. We should always use positive, instructional language and use clear, precise language. Parents should be advised of new vocabulary, and word maps should be shared so it can also be reinforced at home. For routines, the appropriate use of visual timetables, it should be personalised where possible to the child, so it can have more of an impact. And we should always minimise the use of abstract language. When you finish speaking, it's really important to leave time for the child to process what has been said, and ask the child to repeat back what you have said to get a real clear understanding of how they have interpreted what has been said. While they are speaking, make sure you give the child your full attention, give good eye contact, and use your non-verbal skills to show them that you are listening. Model being that fantastic listener. And give the child or young person time to formulate their ideas and get them out. It's also really important that you try and keep the child on topic, but be careful not to interrupt the child. Give them that time. to speak, and if they are going off topic, gently remind the child we are talking about. When they finish speaking, if the child has gone off topic, explain this to them and try to get them to refine their answer. The best way to do this is not to ask them to repeat any of the words. The best way to approach this is you repeat back what you think the child wanted to tell you and give them a clear model of this. And then ask the child to check that information so they feel fully supported in refining their work and their answer. While you are speaking, be really aware of how many key words in a sentence the child you are working with can cope with. Use short sentences, break sentences up into chunks of information, and leave time between each chunk for the child to process what you have said. It can be useful to use gestures or pointing to help the child build up a visual picture. And watch for signs that the child didn't understand, facial expressions, looking away, fidgeting, and repeat your sentence if necessary. Give key information at the beginning to establish the context. So use less chat and commenting so the young child can pick out the important information. So, for an example, instead of, okay, now it's time that you go and get your coat, please go and get it, be really clear, your coat, go and get it. Or, pens down, stand up, line up. Rather than, okay everyone, now it's time to go and line up. And ask one question at a time. Don't overload the child with information. Another useful way to overcome these barriers is using a visual cue and to give context when talking about things that have happened. It's all about knowing the child, knowing what they can cope with, how many words they can cope with, and how best to communicate with that child. Before speaking, reduce the amount of background noise. Take some time to be quiet and listen. Are there noises that automatically tune you out? Then it would be best to choose an alternative place to work. And reduce distractions. Is there lots going on? Are you in a busy classroom? And get the child to pay attention by calling their name. Make sure the child is looking at you if they're able to, and make sure that young child is quiet, calm, and able to listen. How to effectively overcome the barriers to learning experienced by children with sensory and/or physical need. It's important we give as many first-hand, real, multi-sensory experiences as possible. Ensure there's well thought-out seating plans in place and positions in relation to the whiteboard are considered. To try out different paper, whiteboard colours and overlays to try and find the best contrast. Eliminate inessential copying from the board. Where copying is required, ensure appropriate print size photocopy is available. Always use verbal explanations when modelling. Read out loud as you write on the board. Address the pupil by name to get their attention before giving any instructions or information. Keep background noise to a minimum and consider the organisation of the classroom to allow for free movement. Ensure that left and right-handed pupils are not sitting next to each other with writing hand adjacent. Sloping desks provided if possible. Wobble cushions. Encourage oral presentations as an alternative to some written work. Offer pen or pencil grips. Lined paper with spaces sufficiently wide to accommodate the pupil's handwriting. Attach paper to the desk with masking tape to avoid having to hold with one hand and write with the other. Reinforce verbal instructions by repeating several times. Give no more than 1 or 2 instructions at a time. And ask the child to explain what is required to check understanding. Sensory and/or physical needs. Some children and young people require special educational provision because they have a disability which prevents or hinders them from making use of the educational facilities generally provided. These difficulties can be age-related and may fluctuate over time. Many children and young people with vision impairment, hearing impairment, or a multisensory impairment will require specialist support and/or equipment to access their learning or rehabilitation support. Children and young people with a multisensory impairment have a combination of both vision and hearing difficulties. Some children and young people with a physical disability require ongoing support and equipment to access all the opportunities available to their peers. Heavy work is any type of activity that pushes or pulls against the body. Heavy work activities help build up our strength, joint and stability, and also improves our focus and concentration. These are some easy ways to help maintain your child's strength and focus and help them transition back into the classroom. Engaging in sensory activities is beneficial in several ways for a child with SEN needs. It can help with stimulating the brain, creating neural pathways, and improving sensory processing systems. It can improve social skills such as communication and cooperation, and it improves coordination as well as fine and gross motor skills.
Thank you very much to Zoe and Grace for producing this extremely informative SEND training session. There was lots of great information in here. Please feel free to rewatch the sections when needed and make notes that you may want to refer to in class. Please remember to complete the form in the description box below to evaluate and keep a record of your training. Join us again the same time next week. We're going to be starting with our maths training on Monday with a focus on number and place value. Thank you very much.